The strange part is, nobody slammed the door. Nobody screamed. They just stopped showing up, one by one, and for the longest time, I thought that meant I hadn't done anything wrong. I used to believe that if you hurt someone badly enough, you'd know. There would be a moment. A fight, a confrontation, something you could point to later and say, that's when it broke. I built my whole understanding of relationships around that idea, without ever really questioning it. I was 34 when my younger brother stopped answering my calls. Not all at once. First it was one missed call turning into two, then a text reply that came a day late, then 3 days, then nothing. I told myself he was busy. He had a new job, a new apartment, a life that didn't have as much room for me in it anymore. That's normal, I thought. People grow apart. It happens gently, like a tide going out. Around the same time, a friend I'd known since college, someone I used to talk to almost every week, quietly stopped inviting me to things. I noticed it, but I didn't let myself sit with the noticing. I told myself I was overthinking it. I told myself that's just what happens when people get older, get married, get busy. I had a story ready for every absence, and every story ended the same way: it's not about me. I want to be honest about something. I wasn't a bad brother. I wasn't a bad friend. If you'd asked me back then, I would have described myself as someone who cared deeply about the people in his life. And I did care. That part was never the problem. The problem was how I showed up when they needed me to actually listen. There was a pattern I didn't see in myself for years. When someone told me they were struggling, a bad day, a hard week, a fear they were sitting with, I had this reflex to fix it immediately. I'd jump straight to advice. I'd tell them what they should do, how they should think about it differently, why it probably wasn't as bad as it felt. I thought I was being helpful. I thought that's what support looked like. What I didn't understand back then is that when someone is hurting, they're often not asking you to solve anything. They're asking you to sit with them in it for a minute before you try to lead them out. I remember one night, my brother called me. This was maybe 8 months before he stopped calling altogether, and he was quiet in a way that wasn't like him. He said something like, "I don't know, I've just been feeling kind of lost lately." And instead of asking him what that meant, instead of asking how long he'd felt that way, I told him he probably just needed a new routine, maybe a hobby, maybe more sleep. I gave him a 5-minute pep talk and moved on to asking about his weekend. He said, "Yeah, maybe," in this flat voice, and we talked about something else, and I hung up feeling like I'd been a good brother that night. I had no idea I'd just done the opposite of what he needed. It took me a long time to understand that moments like that one don't feel like rejection in real time. They feel like small disappointments. A little quieter than usual. A little less understood than you hoped. And on their own, they're nothing. Nobody ends a relationship over one conversation that didn't land right. But that's not how people actually leave. I used to think distance happened because of one big wound. What I've come to understand since is that it's rarely a single wound at all. It's an accumulation, dozens of tiny moments where someone reaches toward you emotionally, and you respond a half-second too fast, or a half-degree too dismissively, and they quietly recalibrate how much of themselves they're willing to bring to you next time. Not out of anger. Out of self-protection. Each time it happens, they don't announce it. There's no scene. They just adjust, slightly, how much they let you in. And if it keeps happening, eventually the adjustments add up to something that looks, from the outside, like distance appearing out of nowhere. But it isn't out of nowhere. It's the result of 100 small underreactions nobody ever talked about out loud. I didn't learn this from a book, at least not at first. I learned it because a therapist I saw years later, after my brother had stopped calling, after that college friend had faded into birthday texts and nothing else, asked me a question that stayed with me. She asked, "When people come to you upset, what's usually the first thing you say?" I told her. And she just nodded slowly and said, "So you skip the part where you let them feel heard, and you go straight to fixing it." I remember sitting there feeling a strange kind of embarrassment, because it was so simple, and I had never once considered it. I thought I'd been present for the people I loved. I hadn't understood that presence isn't the same as attention, and attention isn't the same as actually making someone feel understood. She explained something that psychologists sometimes call emotional attunement, the ability to notice, and reflect back, what someone is actually feeling before responding with solutions or opinions. She said most people don't leave relationships because of conflict. Conflict, if anything, usually means people still care enough to fight. What quietly ends relationships is the absence of attunement, repeated over time, until the other person stops bringing you their inner life altogether. They don't stop loving you. They just stop showing you the parts that matter, because some part of them has learned, gradually, that those parts won't be met the way they need. Once she said that, I couldn't stop replaying conversations in my head. My brother telling me he felt lost, and me handing him a checklist instead of a question. My friend mentioning, almost in passing, that things had been hard at home, and me changing the subject to something lighter because I didn't know what to do with the discomfort. None of these were cruel moments. They were just missed. Over and over, missed. What got me was realizing that the people who pulled away from me weren't testing me, or punishing me, or expecting perfection. They were just quietly noticing, each time, whether I could sit with them in something uncomfortable without rushing to make it comfortable again. And each time I couldn't, they filed it away without meaning to. Not as betrayal. Just as data. I think that's the part that changed how I saw the whole situation. I had always framed myself as the person left behind, wondering what happened. But I was also, without knowing it, the reason it happened. Both things were true at the same time, and neither one canceled out the other. I started doing something different after that. Small, almost embarrassingly small. When someone told me something hard, I'd just ask, "What was that like for you?" and then stay quiet. No advice. No reframing. Just space. It felt unnatural at first, like holding my breath. I wanted so badly to fill the silence with something useful. But I noticed something. People started saying more. My mother, during a phone call about something small, ended up telling me things about her marriage to my father that I'd never heard before, just because I didn't rush her past the uncomfortable part. A coworker, venting about a bad week, actually thanked me afterward, not because I'd solved anything, but because I hadn't tried to. I did reach out to my brother, eventually. It wasn't a big dramatic reconciliation. I just called him one day and told him I was sorry I hadn't really listened back then, and that I understood if that had made things feel one-sided. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "I didn't think you noticed." That sentence has stayed with me longer than almost anything else in this whole story. What I understand now is that people rarely leave because of what you did to them. Far more often, they leave because of what you failed to notice while it was happening. And the cruelest part is that it doesn't feel like a failure in the moment. It feels like an ordinary conversation, the kind you have 1,000 times without thinking twice. I still catch myself sometimes, reaching for advice before I've earned the right to give it. But now I notice it happening, which is more than I used to have. I wonder sometimes how many relationships fall apart quietly, right now, in conversations that seem completely unremarkable, one person reaching out just slightly, and the other one, without any bad intention at all, reaching past them instead of toward them. No fight. No goodbye. Just a slow, invisible recalibration that nobody names until it's already finished. If you've ever wondered why someone you loved simply faded instead of walking away outright, maybe it wasn't one big thing. Maybe it was 100 small ones, each too quiet to notice on its own. I just wonder how many of them are happening today, in conversations we won't even remember by tomorrow.